Meet Jonathan Bird, one of the world's top underwater nature cinematographers. Traveling the world on assignment for all the major networks, he is an Emmy Award-winning authority on the underwater world. In freshwater or salt, reefs, wrecks, or caves, Jonathan documents the world beneath the waves. Welcome to the Blue World.
Manta rays are among the ocean's most majestic animals. And while I've seen a few manta rays in my travels, I've never seen a manta ray feeding frenzy, something that happens during a specific time of the year at a remote atoll in the Indian Ocean. So I've come here to Banda Atoll in the Maldives for the adventure of a lifetime. The Maldives are a group of islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean, just southwest of India's southern tip. They're made up of thousands of coral atolls dotting the tropical blue water. Here you can see everything from a traditional local fisherman in a rowboat with a single fishing pole to the hustle and bustle of water taxis around the capital city of Mali. I'll be exploring the Maldives aboard a luxury dive yacht capable of traveling hundreds of miles between atolls to find the best dive sites. I'm brought aboard by a small boat called a dooney that will cruise alongside us. We'll use the dooney as our diving platform. Soon we set sail for Banda Atoll, and the captain drives the boat not with a gigantic steering wheel, but a tiny joystick. We leave the busy capital behind and cruise out into open water. Although the boat has diesel engines, she gets a helping hand from favorable winds. The next morning, our dive master Shah gives us a short lecture on what to expect and how we're going to find the mantas. Once our gear is aboard the dooney and the captain ready to head out, we climb aboard and they shove off from the mother ship. Time to go looking for manta rays. We navigate between the shallow reefs and sandy lagoons on our way to a place called Hanafaru Bay. There are 20 divers on this expedition, and we're suited up and ready to go. Shah is watching for mantas from the top deck. We pass idyllic beaches on enchanting uninhabited islands. Hanafaru Bay turns out to be not much more than a ring of coral reefs surrounding a shallow sandy seafloor. It's not really a bay at all. Shah doesn't see anything resembling a manta, but we decide to go check it out anyway. I suit up, keeping my expectations high. Well, this is it. Hanafaru Bay. Let's go see if we can find some manta rays. The reefs around the outside of Hanafaru Bay are gorgeous, filled with colorful corals and schools of fish. But the sandy bottom of the bay is fairly featureless, and there are no mantas. I wait for a while looking up for manta shapes, but nothing swims over. Mantas only come here when the tides are just right because plankton accumulates in the bay. Well, no mantas. You know, they tell me there can be like 50 or 100 mantas in this bay, but so far we haven't seen any. I guess we'll try again tomorrow. As the sun sinks below the horizon, I can only wonder what tomorrow will bring. I sure hope I didn't come all this way for nothing. The next morning, we're off again to look for mantas. Dive masters Shaw and Shumi are on top of the boat scouring the water for shadows. They want to find the mantas just as badly as we want to see them. We approach Hanafaru Bay with bated breath.
There's one. Look at there.
Shumi's keen eyesight has caught a shadow a few hundred yards away in the middle of Hanafaru Bay. As we get closer, we realize there are at least a dozen mantas swimming around at the surface. Who knows where they were yesterday, but today they're here. So, without wasting any time, we get ready to go into the water. Some of our group is going to try snorkeling with them, which is probably a better way to keep up. To shoot steady footage, I really need to get down away from the surface waves, so I'm going to use my scuba gear. I hit the water and immediately a manta turns and comes towards me, flying like a huge bird with a 10-foot wingspan right over my head. These strangely shaped animals are relatives of sharks. They have no swim bladder and they sink if they stop swimming. So, just like gigantic underwater birds, they flap their wings to move and stay up off the bottom. Even though their mouths are open wide, these animals present no threat to people. They eat only plankton. They catch the plankton by swimming with their mouths wide open and funneling extra water in using two special fins in front of their mouth called cephalic lobes. Looking down into a manta's throat, you can see the gills. The water goes back out through the gills, but the plankton gets caught on comb-like filters. So a manta ray is like a big swimming strainer that filters out all the tiny planktonic bug-like animals in the water. As I watch them feed, I can see their massive gill slits underneath where the water comes back out. While some mantas like to swim along the surface to feed, others find a good spot filled with plankton and do barrel rolls, filtering the same cloud of plankton over and over until they've gotten most of it. This pair of mantas feeds in formation. I have no idea if this helps them feed more effectively, if it's just a coincidence, or maybe they're just pals. The mantas don't seem to mind me at all. At first I thought that maybe they were so busy feeding that they didn't notice much, but sometimes it seems like they're actually coming by on purpose to give me a look. The water is filled with tiny silvery fish that are also feeding on the plankton. They swim through my frame like a cloud of silver, dangerously near the mantas' mouths, but fast enough to avoid the hungry mantas. As the sun gets lower in the sky, the tide is turning and conditions for feeding become less ideal. The mantas start to wander off into the open ocean.
Man, that is what we came for. Dozens of manta rays all feeding at the same time with the tide going out. Amazing to see with all their mouths wide open and zooming back and forth. Woohoo! Man, that was awesome.
After 10 days at Hanafaru Bay, I only saw the feeding frenzy on 3 occasions when conditions were just right. But those magical few hours I spent in the water with the mantas were worth every bit of the trouble in traveling all the way to the Maldives. Once again, I have been fortunate to witness a stunning performance of nature in the shallow waters of the Blue World.
Don't go away. Jonathan travels to an uninhabited island in Indonesia to find thousands of sea snakes.
Some of the world's richest coral reefs thrive in Indonesia. Located in the middle of the so-called Coral Triangle, the diversity of species and colors of Indonesian reefs absolutely amazes me every time I get the chance to dive here. This time, however, it's not the reefs I've come to film, but a remote and uninhabited island whose waters are reputed to teem with thousands of sea snakes. The island, known as Manuk, is an active volcano 100 kilometers from the nearest inhabited island, smack dab in the middle of the Indonesian archipelago. Getting there is no easy task. I've chartered the Seahorse, a traditional Indonesian pinisi built for divers, for a special itinerary to reach Manuk Island. Dive Master Jandri meets me at the marina in Sarong. It took me 2 full days of flying just to get to Sarong from the United States. He takes me out to the Seahorse, my home away from home, for the next 2 weeks. This expedition will take 14 divers 1,200 miles across the Banda Sea, from Sarong to Alor, stopping to dive along the way at many islands. The most important of which, of course, is Manuk. I board the Seahorse, and once everyone else has arrived, we pull anchor and head for the open sea in search of some serious underwater adventures. The next morning, we reach our first dive site in Raja Ampat. I can hardly wait to hit the water and get a look at the spectacular reefs. Raja Ampat is the most biologically diverse area in Indonesia, and therefore the world. As I roll into the water and get my camera, the first thing I see is a wonderfully healthy, shallow, hard coral reef. Nearby are sea fans sheltering tiny fish. Along the drop-off, larger schools of fish hunt, swirling around the reef. In the deep blue, a school of spadefish regard me without fear as I swim among them. Back at the reef, a camouflaged fish lies on the sand between the coral heads. It's a crocodile fish, an ambush predator waiting for prey to come close. Even its eye has camouflage. Later in the day, I suit up once again for another mind-blowing experience. This is a dive on a tiny seamount, a coral pillar that would be a small island if only it were a tad taller. This underwater tower is the home of the largest school of butterfly fish I've ever seen. They hover here in the strong current, apparently feeding on something that the current brings to them. They don't seem to mind my presence at all. It's a mesmerizing experience to dive within the school, enveloped on all sides by colorful fish. Exhausted by swimming in the current, I relax and drift away from the seamount. I float gently towards the surface where I make a short safety stop for decompression. Finally, I head back to the Seahorse, my first day of diving done. A beautiful day leads to a beautiful sunset, and I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings. For 5 days, the pilot of the Seahorse advances us across Indonesia from island to island, with wonderful diving every day. But my mind is focused on one particular spot. And today, at last, we have arrived, Manuk Island. The island is aptly named. Manuk means bird in several Indonesian dialects, and birds it has. Manuk is completely uninhabited, and there are a few reasons why. First of all, it's kind of steep, but more importantly, it's an active volcano. There are steam and sulfur vents all over the island. Standing downwind, you can smell the distinct odor of brimstone. But the big question is, are there any sea snakes here? I depart for the first dive with my fingers crossed that I will see tons of sea snakes.
So, let's go check it out.
When I get down to the reef, I see a wonderfully healthy ecosystem with beautiful coral, abundant fish, and crystal clear water. You couldn't ask for a nicer place to do a dive. The walls drop off steeply into deep water. The reef looks perfectly healthy except for this, an underwater volcanic vent. Toxic gases and heat are coming out of the seafloor. Coral can't grow too close to this vent. The water is murky and the rocks are stained yellow. Whatever I'm swimming in right now is probably not good for me or my camera. Up in shallow water, volcanic bubbles are percolating out of the seafloor. Nothing will grow on these rocks either. The volcanic nature of Manuk Island is everywhere. Yet, among the volcanic bubbles swims a sea snake. It is apparently unaffected by the water quality. It swims casually by flapping its flattened paddle-like section of tail. I follow it down onto the reef, mesmerized by its swimming. Sea snakes are among the most venomous animals on Earth. They use this venom to hunt, and fortunately, attacks on people are extremely rare. Soon I start to see other sea snakes, and I realize that more and more have been appearing. Were they here before and I didn't see them, or did they come out from someplace? Clearly, some were sleeping. This one's taking a nap in plain view on the reef. I guess they don't really have to worry much about predators. I watch this one sleep for a little while and I start to wonder if it's even alive. So I give it a little tickle. I wouldn't do this with a land snake, but sea snakes are very easygoing, almost mellow, and rarely aggressive. The snake just moves a couple of feet away and goes back to sleep. Pretty soon I notice that as the snakes are waking up, they're coming over to check me out. Are they curious? They investigate my fins and gear. They swim closely around me. I know they're not aggressive, so I just try to stay still and not frighten them. Look, they're so mellow I can hold one. Notice how it flicks its tongue. Like land snakes, this is how a sea snake smells. But at the same time, the tongue flicking helps get rid of excess salt from glands in its mouth. Because sea snakes are reptiles, just like land snakes, they have lungs and need to breathe air, just like people. So a sea snake must head to the surface every once in a while for a breath. Sea snakes have a huge lung that takes up nearly the entire length of their body, so they can hold a big breath that will last for a while. Each time a sea snake surfaces, it usually spends a minute or two resting and breathing before gulping in that last big breath and diving back down to the reef. A breath can last 1 to 2 hours depending on the species, but most sea snakes breathe more often than that unless they're sleeping. They can also absorb a little bit of oxygen from the water directly through their skin, which helps them extend their dives. As I ascend from my last dive of the day, I'm really excited about all the sea snakes I saw.
Wow! That dive was snake-tacular! I've seen sea snakes before, but never that many.
The next morning, I'm up at sunrise and heading out to the reef for an early morning dive. Early morning is when the sea snakes hunt, and I'm hoping to witness the reef alive with sea snakes on the prowl. Underwater, the light levels are still low, and I'm heading out to a deep seamount where I saw a lot of sea snakes yesterday. This should be a good place to find some sea snakes hunting. When a sea snake hunts, it takes advantage of having a small head and a thin body to go from hole to hole in the reef, poking its head inside. It hopes to corner a fish or an invertebrate that's hiding in the hole. Once the hunting starts, more sea snakes start coming into the reef to join the hunt. On this seamount, more than 100 feet from the surface, dozens of sea snakes are gathering to prowl the reef for food. Sometimes they appear to work together to make sure nothing escapes. My time is limited at such a deep site, and all too soon I must head for shallower water. There are more sea snakes in the shallows. Sure, I've seen sea snakes before, but why are there so many here at Manuk Island? Is it the remoteness of the place, far from people? Is it a lack of some other predator? For now, nobody's quite sure. But there's no doubt about it. Manuk might be named after the birds, but to me, it will always be the Island of the Snakes.
Meet Jonathan Bird, one of the world's top underwater nature cinematographers. Traveling the world on assignment for all the major networks, he is an Emmy Award-winning authority on the underwater world. In freshwater or salt, reefs, wrecks, or caves, Jonathan documents the world beneath the waves. Welcome to the Blue World.
Sharks are perhaps the most misunderstood animals in the ocean. In spite of the fact that people are only very rarely attacked by sharks, they suffer with a bad reputation. While the world's largest shark, the whale shark, is known to be harmless to people because it's a filter feeder, other sharks have been known to attack people occasionally. The tiger shark and the white shark are two of the largest so-called man-eaters, and they have an equally large bad reputation for being extremely dangerous to people.
But what if I told you that these are not the most dangerous sharks? In fact, the most dangerous shark in the world is probably the bull shark.
It might seem hard to believe. The bull shark looks just like a reef shark, but a little bigger. It doesn't seem all that intimidating. So what's the big deal? As it turns out, bull sharks are responsible for more documented attacks on people than any other species of shark. In 1916, there were several people killed by one or more sharks off New Jersey in the span of 2 weeks. At the time, most people suspected a great white shark, but one of the attacks occurred more than 10 miles up a river, and white sharks have never been known to venture that far from the ocean. It's much more likely that the attack came from a bull shark.
The bull shark is the only species of shark that regularly moves between saltwater and freshwater. In fact, it's been caught by fishermen more than 500 miles up the Mississippi River in Illinois.
Shark attacks are rare, and most often they're believed to be a case of mistaken identity, since attacks on swimmers often occur in shallow, silty water where the shark has a hard time seeing its prey clearly. Nonetheless, bull sharks are considered extremely dangerous animals under some conditions.
Which is why I was so excited when my friend Jorge Loria from Phantom Divers in Playa del Carmen invited me to come film these sharks. He's hand feeding them.
I fly on down to Mexico, landing in Cancun, then heading south to Playa del Carmen, a beach lover's paradise and my favorite place in the world for cenote diving. But this time I'm not diving the cenotes. I'm heading out to a secret dive site in the ocean, hopefully filled with sharks. Big sharks! I make my way over to Phantom Divers to meet my old buddies Jorge and Charlie.
Hey, Jorge, Charlie, how you doing? You guys ready to film some sharks?
Charlie and Jorge have been feeding bull sharks for a few years, and they give me a few tips on what to expect and the best way to film it.
All right.
And of course, some safety tips.
What is very important, never lose of sight that bait.
Okay.
Don't have the bait and be looking this way.
Right.
You gotta be looking at the bait the whole time.
Right.
Okay, because it could be that a shark comes for the other way.
Right.
Usually they come from the front.
My wife Christine and I head down to the beach to climb aboard the Phantom Divers boat. Then it's off to the dive site on a beautiful sunny Mexico day. Before long, we've reached the dive site, and Charlie suits up in his stainless steel shark suit. He'll drop down a few minutes before the rest of us to get the chumming started in advance. This saves us some bottom time for filming. Now the rest of us get suited up and prepare to dive. As usual when diving with sharks, I cover up so I don't have much skin showing.
Well, let's go see some sharks.
I descend towards the bottom through crystal clear, warm water and eventually end up on a sandy seafloor at a depth of 80 feet. A stingray glides past. It can smell the fish Charlie brought down. Jorge takes over for Charlie and hand feeds the growing school of hungry mouths. I stay back a ways so I won't spook the sharks. I know it's hard to believe, but our scuba bubbles are loud and scary to sharks. It doesn't take long for the first couple of bull sharks to arrive, but they keep their distance, not sure what to expect from us. A few minutes later, they approach Jorge closer to see where that yummy smell is coming from. But they're not ready to trust him enough to take the fish from his hands. Even the stingray has managed to procure a snack from Jorge. I'm starting to think these sharks are wimps. At last, the first shark makes her move. She takes the fish right from Jorge's hand. The next shark actually misses the fish and doesn't have the maneuverability to turn around and get it, so she finally gives up and goes around again. Now that the sharks have figured out that we're not a threat, I can move a little closer to Jorge for filming and the sharks won't mind. Jorge's steel mesh gloves protect him from the shark's teeth just in case his fingers get too close to their mouths. The sharks have a voracious appetite. They keep eating until we're all out of fishy snacks. I can't help but notice how monstrous they are compared to a diver. Bull sharks might look like reef sharks, but they get a lot bigger. At last, we've reached our bottom time limit, and it's time to ascend towards the surface. While we do a safety decompression stop near the surface, the sharks come up to investigate. Clearly, they've overcome their apprehension about us. In fact, it kind of seems like they don't want us to go. Jorge has one last piece of fish, and he offers it to the sharks as a parting gift. At the end of an exciting dive like this, I can't help but be totally pumped.
Whoa! Those sharks are huge! I can't believe I'm gonna get a chance to feed them!
Later, back at the dive shop, I chat with Jorge and Charlie about what I'll be doing tomorrow, wearing the chainmail shark suit.
All right, so have you ever wear a chainmail before?
No, never.
Well, these things are very heavy. They're about 30 pounds, the full suit. So we're gonna put on the suit. It's very important that you put your boots over the suit, because if not, on the boat, it's super slippery and you can hurt your ankle like I did yesterday.
Okay, so it's good advice.
Put the boots on, and then when we go in the water, it's very important that you put a lot of air in your BCD so you don't sink as a rock. Okay. When we get to the bottom, completely deflate that BCD, and I'm gonna start the feeding part, so the sharks get close to us, and once we get the action, I'll hand the chum bucket to you. Me and Charlie will be right behind you. You'll be fine, man.
I'll be fine. I'm gonna wear chainmail, man. It's gonna be so cool!
The next morning, we head back to the same dive site on another beautiful, flat, calm day. Boy, do I love diving in Mexico. Once again, Charlie gets in first with his container of bait to get the action started in advance, while I learn how to put on the chainmail. The chainmail suit is made of thousands of interlocking rings of stainless steel, which form a kind of fabric. It's super flexible, but the sharp teeth of a shark can't bite through it. Unfortunately, it weighs 30 pounds, so I'll sink like a rock when I hit the water if I'm not prepared. Jorge, of course, is diving with me, as is a shark biologist named Mauricio Padilla, who will be attempting to take a tissue sample from a shark.
1, 2, 3.
I sink rapidly down to the bottom in my 30-pound shark suit. When we arrive, Jorge hands me a piece of fish, and now it's my job to entice the sharks over. We were feeding yesterday, so it doesn't take them long to come on over. As I wave my piece of fish around, Mauricio is behind me, waiting for his chance to take his tissue sample. Soon, a big bull shark comes up and takes a close look at the piece of fish I'm offering. She likes what she sees because she makes another pass around and takes it gently from my hand. Jorge takes a turn next while I grab another piece of bait. Then I feed again, and the shark makes a nice close pass to a few other divers that are watching. The sharks are calm and relaxed, just like us. All this time, Mauricio has been hanging back, watching the sharks and making notes. He knows which shark he needs the tissue sample from, and now it's time to make his move. He has with him a spear gun, but instead of a spear, it has a special tip designed to grab a tiny sample of skin and muscle from a shark. The heavy chainmail makes my job really easy. I'm planted on the bottom. Mauricio has to be patient. The shark has to be really close because its skin is so tough. He has a camera mounted on the spear gun so he can identify the shark later. At last, the right shark comes close and Mauricio fires. The gun camera footage shows perfect aim. The tissue sample came right from the thick skin at the base of the dorsal fin. The shark absolutely feels a pinch, but the sample does not harm the animal, and in fact, she comes around and feeds again. Inside the tip of this instrument is a tiny sample of the shark's tissue that will be used to learn what these sharks normally feed upon, and if they're interbreeding with other populations of bull sharks around the Caribbean. Later, I chat with Mauricio about his research projects. Bull sharks are only one of the species he's studying in Mexico. And then he shows me the tissue sample we got.
So this is the core, and we have, you can see the muscle. That's the red thing, that's the muscle.
Yeah.
And also we have the skin. And we are gonna do two kind of analysis. With the skin, genetic analysis, in order to know if this population is related with other populations. And with the muscle, we are gonna do an analysis that it's called stable isotope analysis. With that, you can know if the sharks, when they are here, are feeding on coronado or remoras or whatever.
So how many have you taken so far?
11.
11
11
That's
biopsies.
probably not enough to learn much yet.
No, we need at least 30.
Mauricio's sampling program, combined with some satellite tagging, is already shedding some light on the mysteries of the bull shark. And Jorge's hand feeding is helping to dispel some myths about these sharks.
Well, there you go. I fed the most dangerous sharks in the world. Man-eaters? What do you think? I don't think so. In fact, I had so much fun, I'm gonna go see them again.
Don't go away. Jonathan is about to go diving with some astronauts at NASA.
Blue World takes me on adventures all over the planet. Today's adventure takes me to the Johnson Space Center at NASA in Houston, Texas.
And I'm standing on the International Space Station!
Well, not exactly. I'm standing on an underwater full-size replica of the International Space Station in a gigantic indoor swimming pool. Here, they train astronauts to work in zero gravity by simulating these conditions underwater. Outside, it just looks like a huge warehouse, but inside is the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, the NBL. I arrive early in the morning and meet Daniel Sadeh, the facility manager, who has arranged our visit.
Hey, Dan.
Good morning, Jonathan. Welcome to the NBL.
Thank you. I can't wait to see this place.
Let's come on in and get you all set up.
We drag all our gear inside and get our first glimpse of the NBL. This thing is huge, a swimming pool nearly the size of a football field. As we arrive, the morning mission briefing is just starting. The entire team, from astronauts to support divers to technicians, are all given a thorough run-through on the training exercises for the day. And cameraman Tim and I are part of this meeting, because they're going to let us dive in the NBL today with the astronauts. Our morning starts with a quick checkup. All divers in the NBL must pass a rigorous physical and a checkup before the dive. Cameraman Tim and I are no exception. We pass our checkup, and next we meet up with Sarah Williams, the dive training officer, who gives us a dive safety briefing.
The pool deck itself is also a functioning, working pool deck.
What to do and what not to do in the NBL.
So all divers need to comply with the direction of the dive supervisor. As I said, they are the supervisor on deck. Please give them a heads up when you're getting ready to get in the water so they know that they have someone to account for.
Just as we finish our briefing, the team is gathering on the deck to begin preparations for putting the astronauts in the water. Getting into a spacesuit is no easy feat. In fact, it might be easier in the zero gravity of orbit. But here on land, it takes assistance. The astronauts wear liquid-cooled underwear to keep them from overheating. That's what these tubes are for. The torso of the suit is clamped to a cage because it's too heavy to lift. Because this spacesuit is specially modified for underwater use and has a lot of lead weight in it. Climbing into the torso is a little tricky. It takes nearly an hour to suit up. The last thing to go on is the helmet. Underwater, a high oxygen blend of air will be fed to the astronauts through their umbilicals. Meanwhile, the safety divers are in the water getting ready. They wear double scuba tanks so they have enough air to stay down as long as necessary to complete the mission. Tim and I are getting ready too. I can't wait to see this enormous underwater facility. I descend into the clearest water I've ever seen, and it looks like an underwater movie set. The pool is a staggering 40 feet deep, and everywhere I look are full-size replica sections of the International Space Station. I take a few minutes to explore the pool. I can see from one end to the other very clearly, meaning that the underwater visibility is over 200 feet. I could spend a few hours just swimming around down here. It's like a playground for divers with all sorts of great structures to swim through. For the astronauts, now the moment of truth. A crane lifts them into the pool, wearing 300 pounds of spacesuit apiece. Underwater, the safety divers meet them and carefully remove them from the platform. Each astronaut is carefully weighted to be precisely neutrally buoyant. Hey, they don't call it the neutral buoyancy lab for nothing. Once weighted properly, the astronauts hover in the water as if floating in the weightlessness of space. Since fins don't work in space, the astronauts don't get to wear them here. They must be moved from task to task by the divers. The divers are also responsible for keeping a careful eye on everything happening. Each astronaut has 4 divers assigned to him or her. 2 are safety divers. Another has a camera with a cable going to the control room. And there are more cameras mounted all over the inside of the pool, too. In the test director room overlooking the pool, 21 monitors keep the staff informed of everything that happens below. They oversee the safety of the operation. If anything were to go wrong, the divers can get the astronaut to the surface in only seconds. In the test conductor room, another team is conducting the training run. The test conductor and team speak directly to the astronauts through the communications gear in their helmets. But powerful underwater speakers allow the divers to hear everything that's being said, even if they can't talk back.
Go ahead and swim EV1 over to Z1 to check out EV2's APFR ingressing.
The point of all this effort is to provide a learning environment for astronauts where they can practice tasks over and over in simulated zero gravity before they're required to do it by themselves in space. Tasks that are easy on land become much harder in zero gravity. And harder still while wearing a spacesuit that has to be able to protect an astronaut from the vacuum of space. A spacesuit is designed to have more pressure on the inside than on the outside, since it's effectively inflated like a balloon in space. Here in the NBL, that pressure is backwards. Water is definitely not a vacuum. In order to keep the water pressure from squishing the astronauts as they go deeper, the suits are inflated to a pressure just a few psi higher than the surrounding water. When an astronaut goes deeper into the pool, the water pressure pushes in on the suit and tries to compress it, so the suit is given more internal pressure to keep it inflated correctly. As the astronaut ascends towards the surface, the air inside the suit expands and tries to overinflate the suit, so some of the air is released. In this way, the suit always stays inflated just as it would be in space. After a couple hours of training, the divers move one of the astronauts over to the platform and remove her glove. This training exercise simulates a suit failure, and it's one of the things that astronauts practice underwater. The continuous flow of bubbles from the sleeve shows the regulator in the suit attempting to maintain positive pressure. Soon the astronaut is lifted from the water after a successful training mission. Tim and I head back to the surface too.
Woo! That is the coolest swimming pool ever.
Later, I have the opportunity to meet Ron Guerin, a real astronaut. He has spent nearly half a year in space and more than 27 hours spacewalking. So you know what I had to ask him.
You gotta tell me what it's like to be in space.
What's it like to be in space? Well, it's a lot like being in the pool here. The only difference is when you turn upside down in the pool, you feel upside down. When you turn upside down in space, you don't. There is no upside down, so you don't feel that, have that sensation of blood rushing to your head, and you can't beat the view.
Yeah, I guess that's true, huh? What did you do here that helps you as an astronaut?
Well, what we do here is we train for our spacewalks, and you know, there's 2 ways to look at it. One is that when we were flying the shuttle, we had very, very specific, very choreographed spacewalks. And so for every hour that we spent outside in the vacuum of space, we spent about 7 hours underwater, making sure that we knew exactly how things were going to be. There's a full-scale mock-up, as you guys saw, there's a full-scale mock-up of the space station down there. So just to know how to get around, to know the lay of the land, if you will, know how the equipment works. But nowadays, since we don't have the space shuttles, what we're really training for is if something breaks. If we have a piece of equipment that breaks, then we have to go out and sometimes in a fairly expeditious manner to fix the equipment. And we never know what's going to break beforehand, so we have to kind of train a skill set, you know, to learn the basic skills on how to fix anything that can go wrong outside.
I spent an hour chatting with Ron about being an astronaut and training underwater in the neutral buoyancy lab. I explained that I'm a perfect choice to join the space program. I mean, after all, I'm already good at working in zero gravity. But I don't think he was convinced. So, instead of joining the space program, the Blue World team ended our exciting day by getting our picture taken with Ron. Sometimes my adventures in the Blue World take me to fascinating places I'll never forget.
Today on Jonathan Bird's Blue World, Jonathan meets a group of veterans learning to scuba dive as rehabilitation for their injuries. Then he learns how to count fish for science. But first, a rare and endangered seal in Hawaii. All of this today on Jonathan Bird's Blue World. Meet Jonathan Bird, one of the world's top underwater nature cinematographers. Traveling the world on assignment for all the major networks, he is an Emmy Award-winning authority on the underwater world. In freshwater or salt, reefs, wrecks, or caves, Jonathan documents the world beneath the waves. Welcome to the Blue World.
Seals and sea lions are among the ocean's most endearing creatures. Their antics and appearance often remind me of undersea puppy dogs, and sometimes these playful animals interact with divers. Most seals and sea lions live in the cool water of temperate seas or the frigid water of the polar regions. The so-called monk seals are the only seals that live in the tropics. And I've come all the way to a remote part of Hawaii to meet this incredibly rare animal, the Hawaiian monk seal.
The Hawaiian monk seal is critically endangered. There are less than 1,200 animals left.
The rugged coast of the Hawaiian Islands might seem like a perfect place for seals, but these famously shy animals are rarely seen in the main Hawaiian Islands. On the island of Kauai, I'm up before sunrise for an adventure that will take me out to sea all day. I'm joining Fathom 5 divers to make a long trip over to a remote island where just a few monk seals are known to live. We leave the dock for a 2-hour crossing to Ni'ihau, the Forbidden Island. It's a beautiful morning in Hawaii, but this trip is rarely flat calm. Two hours later, we approach Ni'ihau and a smaller island next to it called Lehua Rock. The remains of an ancient volcano, Lehua Rock is an uninhabited island. It's a protected bird sanctuary and home to a small group of Hawaiian monk seals that are known to be curious about divers. As we approach and anchor the boat, I'm on the lookout for any seals. We've come to a spot where they're frequently seen, but there are no guarantees in nature. But I don't have to wait long. A curious monk seal comes right over to give us a look. But the real question is, will he allow me to film him underwater? I gear up for what could be the greatest dive of my life or the most boring, depending on what happens. I drop into the water, grab my camera, and sink towards the bottom, where I look around for a monk seal. The volcanic rock has been deposited in layers, producing a beautiful vertical drop-off made even more spectacular by the excellent visibility. I can hear a strange sound in the distance, but I can't tell where it's coming from. Soon I find the source of the sound, a male monk seal floating in mid-water, vocalizing. The most important part of filming any marine mammal is never to swim to it, but let it come to you. There's no way I can outswim a seal, nor am I likely to sneak up on it. So, my best chance at getting close to this animal is to wait and see if it gets curious about me. So far, however, he seems much more interested in vocalizing. Nobody is quite sure what the vocalizing is about, but it seems to be unrelated to my presence. It has been suggested that this is a form of mating call from the male to any nearby females. One of the problems for the recovery of this species is the fact that there are far more males than females. Finding a female in the vastness of the ocean is not easy. I try to act like I'm doing something else in the hope that the seal will grow curious. But finally I have to leave the water because I'm getting low on air.
Well, that was really interesting. We had one seal that was coming around us, not too close, but taking a look at the camera, and then going off into the blue and vocalizing, making that sort of growling sound.
And that vocalization hopefully will lead to this, finding a mate. In their leisure time, monk seals like to play in the surf together. It looks like fighting, but usually nobody gets hurt. This couple is on their way to mating. The remote coasts of Kauai, Niihau, and Molokai conceal isolated beaches devoid of human encroachment. These are the places that monk seals seek out to give birth to their pups. Human encroachment is one of the main threats facing the recovery of the Hawaiian monk seal population. And tiger sharks are a big threat to the pups just learning to swim. A mother monk seal usually gives birth to only one pup, which is totally dependent on her care for about a month and a half. During that time, she gives her pup milk and swimming lessons. Unfortunately, only 20% of newborn pups make it to their second birthday. This high mortality is the reason that the Hawaiian monk seal is having such a hard time making a comeback from hundreds of years of hunting. Of course, now the Hawaiian monk seal is on the endangered species list and protected from hunting throughout its entire range. The Caribbean monk seal was not so lucky. It was hunted into extinction. The last living animal was seen in 1952. Hopefully, the efforts to protect and rehabilitate the Hawaiian monk seal population are not too late. Back at the boat, while everyone else has lunch, I decide to do a little snorkeling and check out the reef in the shallows. While floating there looking at the fish, guess who has snuck up on me? A monk seal's natural curiosity has brought him over for a look at the awkward floating human. He seems like he's just taking a rest at the surface. Maybe all that vocalizing gets tiring. He looks right into my camera lens. Clearly he's curious about me or my camera. I float in the water for half an hour as the seal repeatedly pops his nose above the surface for a breath of air. Finally, with one last breath, he dives about 50 feet down and starts to vocalize again. Soon it's time for another scuba dive, so cameraman Todd and I head to the boat and gear up. We hit the water and swim down to the reef. Almost immediately, the seal comes over to greet us, swimming right past Todd. He swims right down to me and floats gently above the bottom. He can see me clearly because the eyes of a seal are designed to work underwater. Seals have blurry vision on land, but crystal clear vision down here. Soon the seal starts rubbing his back on the rocks. Even a seal likes a back scratch. He doesn't mind my presence at all. Or maybe he just thinks the lens on my camera produces a nice reflection of himself. His big whiskers do more than make him look cute. They help him hunt fish. They're sensitive to vibrations in the water and detect movement at close range in the dark. As I continue to observe, the seal goes back to vocalizing right in front of me. He brings the air up from his lungs into his throat, then exhales the bubbles afterwards. I have no idea how he made that sound. Seals are mammals and breathe air, so after a few minutes he needs to head to the surface for a breath. While swimming back to the boat, I notice a sandbar shark swimming through the area. I wonder if it will frighten the seal away. However, much to my surprise, the seal in fact swims over to check out the shark. Then he goes back to vocalizing. It's the shark that swims away.
Wow, that is a first. A shark and a seal on the same dive in the same shot. How cool is that?
I'll never forget my adventures with my new friend, the Hawaiian monk seal. I certainly hope that all that vocalizing pays off and he finds himself a girlfriend. The future of the Hawaiian monk seal depends on it.
Next on Jonathan Bird's Blue World, Jonathan learns how to take a census of marine life. But first, an incredible group of wounded warriors learning to scuba dive.
Most people learn to scuba dive as a recreational activity, combining a love of the water with the desire to explore beneath the waves. But sometimes scuba diving can be therapeutic. Today, I'm meeting a remarkable group of people who learn to dive as a way to heal after serious injury. These men and women are part of a Wounded Warrior program that helps injured members of the military learn to dive as therapy.
I was in Afghanistan conducting operations out there and stepped in a doorway to clear a room, and there was a pressure plate inside the doorway, and stepped on it obviously with my left foot, and it took my leg there.
I received a gunshot wound to my right leg in 2009, shattered about 5 inches of my femur.
Tasha lost some of her fingers in a training accident.
So I pulled my hands out. I was like, I told y'all I didn't want to go on this deployment, and just started making all these jokes. And everybody was like, are you crazy? Your hands are mangled, and you're still joking. I was like, got to.
Oh, I was in a four-wheeler accident, and I broke my neck, and I was paralyzed from the neck down. The doctors told me that I would never walk again, but obviously they were wrong. I had, some good surgeons and some great support from my friends and family, and, here I am, running with the best of them. And I will say that scuba diving is the first time that I haven't felt the limitations of my injury since the accident.
Stuart Snyder is the course director of the Handicapped Scuba Association International. Stu and his team are the ones who taught these wounded warriors to dive.
When the Wounded Warriors project came along, there's a water sports festival in New York City. We went up there for the first time with the Be a Diver pool, and we had 35 wounded soldiers get in and try scuba diving. The funny part about it is we couldn't get them out of the pool. Good morning, welcome to Bonaire.
Each year, after they do their pool and classroom training, several wounded warriors get the chance to travel to the island of Bonaire to complete their training in the open ocean.
Okay.
This year, 6 wounded warriors have come to Captain Don's habitat to learn to scuba dive.
One by one, the warriors enter the water and I'm right behind them with my camera to document their adventure.
Let's go. Does anybody know where our divers went?
Down there, I think.
The warriors start with a basic reef dive to see some marine life. Next, they visit a shipwreck 80 feet below the surface. Divers of all ages and experience levels love to explore shipwrecks. In addition to being magnets for marine life, wrecks are just plain fun to swim through. Whether diving a shipwreck or a coral reef, these wounded warriors find some peace, relaxation, and a little adventure as they explore the beautiful, clear waters of Bonaire.
You just kind of forget everything, forget your worries, just focus on what you're doing, and it's just, there's nothing like it. There's no gravity down there, just do what you want. It's beautiful.
You can go up, down, left, right, any direction you want to go, and there's something cool there to look at.
Once I get in the water, I still do have pain, but it's not nearly what it is while I'm here on land and moving around and everything. I love it, and I plan on moving forward with the whole thing, too.
I think it gives them back self-confidence, self-worth. A lot of times I see them, they're a little hesitant to get in the water. Then they get in, and then it opens a whole new world. It's easier for some of them to move because they're missing legs and arms.
When you're under the water, you're not thinking about your injury. You're thinking about what's going on in that moment. The experience just takes your mind off of everything else.
I'm looking into going further in the whole realm of scuba diving, mainly because I live with pain on a constant basis. It's always there, and scuba diving is the one thing that makes it not hurt as much as it always does here on land.
It absolutely helps with my recovery. It gets me out doing things that I wouldn't normally do, and it's good physical therapy, and it helps me work on my coordination and helps control my breathing. And being under the water, you use muscles you wouldn't normally use, and you're carrying your equipment around, so you get stronger and faster and more coordinated, and it's just been amazing so far.
I don't even feel like there's really a handicap there, if you will. It's real. Like I said, it's non-stressful. I go out there, I just jump in with my water leg. There's really no difference.
The group I work with in New Jersey, myself, our masks are always filled up with water. It's not the pool water or the ocean water, it's tears. It's a real good feeling when you're able to help somebody like that to conquer something. Don't get me going, Bert.
Bonaire honors the wounded warriors with a motorcycle procession through Bonaire. Captain Don's Habitat even loans me a Harley-Davidson to join the procession. We also attend a reception at the home of Lieutenant Governor Glenn Thode. I used the opportunity for some shameless promotion, hopefully turning the governor and his wife into Blue World fans.
Thanks, and so you meet a lot of creatures in the water.
I left that evening with a tremendous respect for these men and women who sacrifice so much for our country and never give up. And I gained a new respect for scuba diving, which is helping them heal and recover from their wounds. The opportunity to meet and dive with these amazing heroes will always make this trip to Bonaire very special.
Don't go away. Jonathan is about to learn how to take notes underwater and count fish.
You ever wonder how many fish are in the sea? Well, biologists have, and today I'm in Rockport, Massachusetts for a special event to answer that very question.
And that event is the Great Annual Fish Count, coordinated by the Reef Environmental Education Foundation. The fish count takes place worldwide, and I'll be diving along with many other divers in Massachusetts to identify and count fish. Why count fish? So biologists can learn about trends in fish populations to better understand and protect those populations. For my part of this project, I'm diving on Cape Ann in Massachusetts. Other divers are spread out all over the USA and the world. But before my day of fish counting, I stop in at Bob Michelson's fish identification course. Bob is the regional director of the Great Annual Fish Count.
So we're going to start with our top 20 species, the most cited frequency of each fish. First one on the list is the cunner.
Now you would think that since I've been diving in New England for over 20 years, I would know all the names of the fish. But it turns out a refresher is never a bad idea.
You'll see over 100 of these fish on a given survey while you're diving.
The morning of the big day, each diver checks in with a reef volunteer and gets a sheet to fill out with the day's finds. And it's always a good idea to listen to the dive briefing, especially when you're diving a new site. Finally, it's time to go count some fish.
I got a slate and a pencil. Aha! So I can write down what I see.
My slate works underwater, so I can make notes as I go. I'm heading into the water with a bunch of other divers. We'll spread out to cover a large area. Hopefully we don't all count the same fish. As I head out to deeper water, first I cross a vast expanse of sandy seafloor. There isn't much here, just a bunch of drifting seaweed and a few rocks. Finally, I get to the bigger boulders out a little further. There's kelp and plenty of good places for fish to hide. This should be a good place to find some fish. I'm not taking any chances. Maybe I'll sneak up on the fish. At last, a fish! I found a cunner. I'm not that proud of myself, though. The cunner is probably the most common fish in Massachusetts. So I keep swimming with my eyes peeled, and then, aha! Finally some luck, a sea robin. This curious little fish walks along the bottom on finger-like pectoral fin spines, and it's not very common on Cape Ann. My dive buddy Mia makes a note. That's a great find. Heading out a little deeper, Mia and I finally hit pay dirt, a huge school of pollock. Now all we have to do is count them. 1, 2, 3. Hey, stop moving, you guys! Oh well, I'll have to just guess and write down, I don't know, 100. That sounds good. Heading back towards shore through the kelp-covered rocks, we eventually return to the sandy shallows and decide to take a look around. I find a strange pair of eyes in the sand. It's a flounder, perfectly evolved for this habitat. A little coaxing reveals the whole fish. Nearby, another creature of the sand, a skate. This relative of the stingray has no stinger for defense. It swims along the bottom by pushing off with its pelvic fins and then gliding a foot or so just an inch above the bottom. I'm finding some good stuff out here on the sand, but as I turn to head back to shore, I find something quite rare. It's an Atlantic torpedo ray. This ray has no stinging spine either, but it can defend itself by delivering an electric shock of up to 220 volts. I'm definitely writing this one down even if nobody believes me. I keep a safe distance as the ray decides to swim off into the depths. Any animal that catches its prey by electrocuting it deserves some respect. I head back to shore with a nice cross-section of fish sightings to show for the dive.
Well, that was great. We found a lot of fish, some cunner, a really big flounder, some skates, and a huge school pollock.
So now I need to get dried off and go report our dive results. We go to Stage Fort Park, also on Cape Ann, where the reef representatives have set up base camp. To make the counts scientifically valuable, I have to fill out a form listing everything I saw and how many. I can't wait to write down the part about the torpedo ray. Bob is looking pretty busy running the event, but I get a quick tour. Tell me what everybody's doing here.
This is citizen scientists at its best.
It's a great event. How many people we got?
Don't have the final totals yet. There's still people out counting fish and surveying, but I'm expecting to end up with 90 to 95 divers today. It'll be the 11th consecutive year we've held the largest fish counting event in the United States here in Gloucester.
So I finished my dives here in Rockport, counting fish, along with thousands of other divers all over the world that were counting fish today as well. And what's really cool is to think that all this data collected will be helping scientists decide which species of fish are in decline and need more help, and which species are doing just fine.
Meet Jonathan Bird, one of the world's top underwater nature cinematographers. Traveling the world on assignment for all the major networks, he is an Emmy Award-winning authority on the underwater world. In freshwater or salt, reefs, wrecks, or caves, Jonathan documents the world beneath the waves. Welcome to the Blue World.
In shallow tropical oceans, coral reefs provide habitat and protection for thousands of species of marine animals, especially fish. In places where the seafloor is too sandy to give coral a place to grab on and grow, there is very little fish life because there's very little protection from predators. For years, fishermen have known, however, that a shipwreck out in the middle of a flat, featureless seafloor becomes a magnet for marine life. Not only is it a place for fish to hide from predators, but it's also a place where coral can take hold and grow. For this reason, shipwrecks are often called artificial reefs. Most shipwrecks are the result of accidents or warfare. They've become popular not just with fish, but with divers who want to see the fish or explore the wrecks. Sometimes these shipwrecks are not in the most convenient place for divers, however, far from shore, sometimes in deep water. So why not intentionally sink a ship in a convenient spot? That's exactly what people are doing all around the world, sinking old ships as a way to create an artificial reef in a particular spot. Sometimes to help out the fishermen, sometimes to give divers a place to go, and sometimes to help out the local marine life. Yes, it's hard to believe, but sinking a big piece of junk on the bottom of the ocean can be a huge help to local marine life.
My question is, how long does it take for a shipwreck to turn into an artificial reef?
To answer this question, I'm off to beautiful Key West, Florida, where a relatively new shipwreck awaits. In 2009, a 522-foot-long decommissioned missile-tracking warship called the Vandenberg was sunk off Key West. Before the sinking, it underwent an extensive cleanup at a shipyard in Virginia to remove anything that might be harmful to the marine environment and to make it safer for divers. Then it was towed all the way to Key West. Carefully placed explosive charges flooded the ship and sent her to the bottom in under 2 minutes. Immediately after the sinking, the ship looked like something from outer space. A completely white, brand new looking ship on the bottom of the ocean. One of the antennae looked ready to be used. Now, 4 years later, the Blue World dive team is heading back down to Key West to visit the Vandenberg and find out what 4 years on the seafloor have done to the ship. We head over to South Point Divers in Key West, where we load the boat and join a regularly scheduled dive to the Vandenberg. Since this wreck is the second largest artificial reef in the world, it's pretty popular with divers who come from all over the world to see it. It's only a few miles offshore to reach the site. Captain Mike drives our dive boat in Key West style. Soon it's time to suit up. Mike gives the dive briefing, and then it's time to go.
Well, it's been 4 years since the last time I was here when they sank the Vandenberg. I wonder what 4 years under the ocean has done to this ship. Let's go find out.
It's a windy day and the visibility is not as good as I had hoped, but soon the ship comes into view. No longer is she ghostly white. The Vandenberg is now covered in a thin layer of marine growth. Encrusting sponges, hydroids, tunicates, as well as small patches of coral festoon her hull. Schools of small fish have discovered the ship as well, keeping their distance from me as I move through the passageways. I love to swim up the stairs of a shipwreck. It gives me the feeling of zero gravity to be hovering above such an iconic symbol of our daily human struggle against the forces of gravity on land. Making my way towards one of the masts, I observe a lot of encrusting marine growth. One of the antennae is covered in the same growth. While the reef is growing well, it still looks like a ship. Four years underwater has allowed the ocean to partially reclaim the ship. There's a thin layer of marine growth, and the fish are starting to call the ship home. Soon it's time to head up to the top of the mast where the mooring line is tied. Fighting the current, I make my way to the line that will lead me safely back to the boat. The next day, we head north up the Keys to Key Largo. Key Largo has some world-famous wrecks. We stop in at Horizon Divers, Key Largo wreck diving experts. Tim and I load our gear onto the boat. Soon we're on our way, navigating through the canals to the open ocean on a beautiful Keys day. We arrive at the wreck of the Spiegel Grove. A slightly older wreck, the Spiegel Grove was sunk in 2002. As the crew ties the boat up to one of the mooring lines, I'm getting suited up for my dive.
So this is the wreck of the Spiegel Grove. It's 11 years old, a little bit older than the Vandenberg. Let's go see what it looks like.
As I follow the mooring line down through the blue water, the first thing I see is the top of a mast. Looking closer, I can see quite a bit of sponge and coral growth here, as well as fish. Deeper on the wreck, a school of jacks regard me with indifference as I make my way towards the main deck. This 11-year-old wreck definitely shows much more marine growth than the 4-year-old Vandenberg. And there seem to be more fish. The presence of smaller fish has attracted predators like barracuda. Some sections of the wreck are so overgrown with sponges and coral that they're completely unidentifiable. And while I definitely know I'm diving a shipwreck, it's undeniable that nature is taking this man-made object back. There's also no denying that exploring a shipwreck is fun. Since the Spiegel Grove was prepared in advance for divers, just like the Vandenberg, it's safe for exploration. Inside a hole in the deck, I find, wait for it, a bathroom. Of course, I explore another set of stairs. I'm rising up to the top of the wreck on my way back to the surface. These ships are so big that they have to be sunk in fairly deep water so they don't stick up and pose a threat to boats on the surface. As a result, the dives tend to be around 100 feet deep, which limits bottom time. I spend a few minutes doing a safety decompression stop on the mooring line just under the surface while I contemplate the wreck.
You know, for being only 11 years old, that wreck has a lot of marine growth. It's really pretty, but not a lot of schools of fish.
This, of course, makes me wonder, what would an even older wreck look like? Our captain drives us a few miles to another even older wreck, the Duane.
120 feet beneath this boat is the wreck of the Duane, which is 25 years old. I'm really curious to see what a 25-year-old shipwreck looks like.
Down on the wreck, I make a beeline for the bridge, known to be one of the most beautiful parts of the Duane. Inside, I discover a refuge for fish completely decorated with sponges and coral. The walls look nothing like the plain metal of 25 years ago. Now they're splashed in yellow, red, orange, and pink pastels. Leaving the bridge, I investigate yet another staircase, still recognizable as such, but so overgrown with sponges and coral that now it looks more like an abstract sculpture. Everywhere I look, the wreck has grown thick colonies of cup corals. And under every overhang, a school of fish hiding from predators. The fish don't know this was once a warship. For them, it's just a great place to live like any other reef. It seems that 25 years old is a good vintage for an artificial reef. All too soon, the dive must come to an end, and I head back towards the mooring line to the boat. My adventures on Shipwrecks have been illuminating. What I've learned is that the Vandenberg has a bright future as an artificial reef as the years go by. I'll be checking in now and then to see how she does as she progresses from a ship to a mature artificial reef.
Don't go away. Jonathan is about to learn to hold his breath for 3 minutes and dive without a scuba tank.
Divers love warm, clear water, and one of the most well-known locations for relaxed tropical scuba diving is the island of Bonaire. Bonaire is located in the southern Caribbean, not far from the coast of Venezuela. It's a beautiful sunny island which enjoys sea breezes powerful enough to generate electricity and has a long history of making salt from the ocean. The last time I visited Bonaire, I was on a mission to film spawning coral. But this time, I'll be doing some diving without a scuba tank.
Diving without scuba gear is called free diving, and frankly, I'm not that good at it.
I've been invited to a free diving class at Buddy Dive Resort. It's being taught by Carol Meyer, a world champion free diver from Brazil. She can hold her breath for over 18 minutes. I head down to the pool where Carol is practicing static apnea, which means holding your breath while you lie very still. We can start the class as soon as she comes up from this breath. Wow, that took a lot longer than I was expecting. Now we can head on over to the classroom. Carol discusses techniques for breathing, rescue techniques, and of course, safety.
If you feel comfortable, if you equalize, if you breathe through the belly, you send more oxygen fast to the body. You close here, you put pressure, the air goes through.
Next, Carol gives me some tips on breathing with my belly in order to get more air into my lungs. All my life I've been breathing, and I thought I was doing it pretty well. But it turns out I'm doing it all wrong for freediving.
It's not easy to do it outside water.
Since freedivers have been known to black out if they try to hold their breath a little too long, the class practices rescue techniques, how to hold someone with their head above the water and open the airway to make sure they breathe. First, Carol demonstrates. Then the students try.
Oh, you're definitely gonna drown, I'm sorry.
After a few attempts, I get the hang of it.
Yes!
Mostly. I'm kind of hoping I don't have to rescue anyone.
I'm back.
All right.
Finally, we practice static apnea. We relax, take big breaths, and float quietly face down in the pool. Nobody in our group is going to set a record, but we're trying to see how long we can comfortably hold our breaths. I'm not wearing a mask because water on the face triggers what's called the mammalian diving response, a lowering of heart rate and conservation of oxygen.
Yes, okay.
The water on my face literally helps me hold my breath longer. After a few attempts, I managed to go just shy of 3 full minutes without a breath. I've never held my breath that long. That's all fine and good, but static apnea is a lot different from swimming in the ocean. Carol takes the class out onto the reef to practice freediving. We gather around a float with a line going down into the blue. One at a time, Carol takes each of us down. We go only to a predetermined depth, so nobody gets in trouble or has a problem getting back to the surface. Soon it's my turn. The line helps me swim straight down, so I don't waste energy going diagonally. At 50 feet, we turn and come back up gently, conserving energy to make that one breath last. Less than 1 minute later, I'm back at the surface. There's no way I could hold my breath for 3 minutes while swimming.
What a day! Today I did some stuff I never thought I'd do. With Carol's instruction, I held my breath for almost 3 minutes. And I dove to 52 feet without a scuba tank!
The next day, I head on over to the dive shop again because Carol is taking the class out on the reef for a few hours of freediving practice. We will each partner up with a buddy and hone our skills. Carol is wearing a big monofin attached to both feet. It takes strong leg muscles to swim with this kind of fin, but it provides a lot of thrust. With it, she swims like a dolphin. And like a dolphin, Carol can go a long time without breathing down there. Now you might ask, why freedive if you can scuba dive? Why hold your breath if you can strap on a tank and breathe all you like? Well, it's peaceful, it's less intrusive in the marine environment, the fish seem much less bothered by freedivers than scuba divers, and it's just a fun skill to develop. But it requires practice, lots of practice. So my buddy and I are practicing and getting better all the time. The goal isn't to go deeper, but to stay longer on the reef, to have more time to look around. Carol shows me I have a long way to go, but as I get more and more comfortable, I'm able to spend more than a minute down on the reef, and my deeper dives are passing the 60-foot mark. This is with only a few days of training and practice. Later in the day, Carol and I spend an hour diving together. Well, sort of. To be honest, I can't really keep up. Carol has set over a dozen world records, not just for static apnea. She's been down to depths over 500 feet on just one lungful of air. Today, swimming around a reef with her class is just goofing around. Easy stuff for Carol. So, at the end of my week of training, Carol certifies that I'm a real freediver, and I have the pin to prove it.
Ooh!
Congratulations.
So I'm an actual...
To achieve the real spirit of apnea.
And now it's up to me to keep practicing, to become one with the sea. Maybe someday I won't need a scuba tank anymore, and I'll become part dolphin like Carol. But somehow, I doubt it.
Meet Jonathan Bird, one of the world's top underwater nature cinematographers. Traveling the world on assignment for all the major networks, he is an Emmy Award-winning authority on the underwater world. In freshwater or salt, reefs, wrecks, or caves, Jonathan documents the world beneath the waves. Welcome to the Blue World.
Caviar is one of the most well-known delicacies in the world, an Epicurean tradition dating back to the ancient Greeks and beyond.
The Romans loved their caviar, and today, a couple thousand years later, people still go crazy for these expensive salty fish eggs.
Caviar comes from an ancient fish called a sturgeon. Sturgeon are one of the oldest families of bony fish in existence. They've been around for hundreds of millions of years. In fact, during the time of the dinosaurs, there were sturgeons swimming around in oceans, rivers, and lakes.
Today, there are 27 species of sturgeon remaining, and all of them are endangered.
In North America, sturgeon used to be so plentiful that they were considered a nuisance to fishermen. But in the mid-1800s, the caviar industry discovered the North American sturgeon, and within 20 years they were nearly gone. Now, more than 100 years later, sturgeon stocks are only just beginning to rebound. To learn more about the sturgeon, I've teamed up with Jen Hayes, a biologist who did her PhD work with the lake sturgeon in the St. Lawrence River. These days, Jen and her husband David Dubélé are underwater photographers working on a story about the St. Lawrence for National Geographic magazine. I tag along with Jen and David as we explore the river where Jen grew up. We pass a huge hydroelectric dam. It generates clean, renewable power for the area. But it does have an environmental side effect. Hydroelectric dams are usually built in the parts of a river with the most vertical drop. This creates more elevation of water behind the dam to run the turbines. But the places with the most vertical drop are usually rapids with fast-moving water, and that's exactly where sturgeon like to spawn. The rest of the river has slow-moving water and a muddy bottom. The eggs sink into the mud and vanish. What few rocks there are get a coating of algae and plants. Not good for spawning. With no rapids, the sturgeon have no place to lay their eggs, and that has made it tough for this fish to reproduce. New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation has undertaken an ambitious project to help increase the number of sturgeon in the river.
Hi, John. How are you? Good.
I meet Roger Clint, an aquatic biologist with the state who's out this morning with his team. The team's job is part research and part midwife. They're collecting eggs from healthy sturgeon to raise them partly in captivity.
Dave, choice? Inshore.
Certain areas of the river have sturgeon present. Roger and his team have set nets to capture both male and female mature sturgeon. The end of the net is marked with a red flag. The nets catch fish as they swim along the bottom, but they don't harm the fish. Gently, each fish comes aboard the boat and goes into a holding tank.
Cool.
They keep plenty of fresh, oxygenated water in the tank to keep the fish alive. When they have 3 or 4 fish in the tank, they head back to the dock. The fish are measured, weighed, and tagged. The biologists are building a database to keep track of individual fish. If they catch them in subsequent years, they can compare notes from the previous years to learn how quickly they grow.
Okay.
The smaller sturgeon go back into the river where they take a few minutes to catch their breath. Sturgeon can live to be over 100 years old and weigh more than 200 pounds. While these might look like big fish, they get a lot bigger. But big ones these days are rare. Since sturgeon are not mature enough to produce eggs until they're about 20 years old, most of these fish are immature and have to go back into the river. They swim away, slowly at first, none the worse for wear. The larger fish, especially females that have a lot of eggs, go up the hill to a larger holding tank with a pump recirculating fresh water. A few mature males go into another tank. Once they have enough fish in their holding tanks, it's time to make some baby sturgeon. First, a male sturgeon is taken from his tank where the team extracts sperm using a syringe.
Towards the back end.
Back.
Turn that around.
Don't even pull him.
You're good.
Then the fish is set free. Once they have samples of sperm from several fish, it's time to harvest some eggs from the females. My job is to hold the egg collection bowl as a female sturgeon comes out of the tank and her eggs are massaged from her belly. This does not harm the fish at all, and immediately after this process, she's set free in the river.
Ready?
Oh yeah. Oh baby. Talk about a science project. Now the eggs are fertilized with the sperm from the male, and the biologists will attempt to create the perfect conditions to produce thousands of healthy sturgeon babies.
Active sperm on eggs.
All of these eggs are going to be baby sturgeon. And that's a lot of sturgeon to put back into the population. I'm using a feather to stir these eggs. We've added an agent in there that's sort of made of clay, and we stir it around, and this clay substance helps the eggs to lose their stickiness. The problem is that we don't want sticky eggs. In the wild, sticky eggs are good because they stick to the bottom of the river. But in a hatchery, sticky eggs are not good.
Next, the fertilized eggs go into bags to be transported in coolers to the hatchery. They will be raised there until they're about the size of your hand.
Once the baby sturgeon get to be about that big, they release them here.
Raising fish in a hatchery helps the dwindling stocks of sturgeon in the river, but it doesn't do anything to address their loss of spawning habitat. Fortunately, someone's working on that problem as well. I meet Ben Lenz, an environmental scientist with the New York Power Authority. He's part of a team that installed an experimental spawning bed for sturgeon, paid for by the Power Authority. The location of the bed is a secret, but Ben told us how to find it. It's quite far from a dock, and we have a lot of gear. So while Jen and David bring the boat, the rest of the Blue World team drives out to a remote area near the river to set up base camp. Soon, Jen and David arrive, and we load the boat for a dive on the spawning beds. Cameraman Todd is along to film the underwater action with me. Jen's nephew Troy is captaining the boat, so Jen and I can dive down to the spawning beds.
And he's doing a good job. And there's a lot of species on the bed right now. There's red horse that lay their eggs just ahead of the sturgeon, and things that come on the bed to eat all the eggs. It's like a fiesta. It's like a big buffet of eggs. When the sturgeon spawn and the red horse spawn, you'll have eels, there's walleye, there's carp galore.
We're diving close to a dam in extremely fast-moving water. This dive can be quite tricky as the current is too strong to swim against. We'll have to jump into the water upstream from the spawning bed and drift down until we get to it. We'll need to get lucky to hit the spawning bed. Underwater, the visibility actually isn't bad for a river, 15 to 20 feet of greenish water. But the current is ripping! There's no way I can swim against it, but instead just tumble along the river bottom. All I can do is follow Jen downstream. And even though the spawning bed is a third the size of a football field, we completely miss it. We surface without seeing any sturgeon.
Well, we went down okay. Current was ripping. We went flying by all these rocks and stuff, getting smashed into them. Bubbles everywhere. And I think we missed the sturgeon. Well, try again.
Troy positions the boat a little closer to shore, a tricky proposition in this much current.
We got to get a little bit closer.
Okay, let's try it. Ready?
Okay.
On the second try, we hit it just right, and the current carries us out into an area that doesn't quite look like a natural river bottom. That's because it's not. The New York Power Authority created this spawning bed by dumping tons and tons of crushed rocks onto a fast-moving section of water to simulate the conditions of rapids. They hoped it would encourage the sturgeon to spawn. As we approach the beds, I start to see sturgeon everywhere. Using remote cameras towed by boats, scientists learned that sturgeon come to the beds at certain times of the year, but nobody has ever seen them actually spawning. This sturgeon is eating the algae from the rocks. Many of the sturgeon have lampreys on them. These primitive fish are like vampires, attaching themselves to a sturgeon and living off of its blood. I grab onto a larger rock and cling desperately in the current, flapping like a flag in the breeze. This is definitely not an easy way to film anything. I only have one hand available for my camera, and I can barely hold it in place in the water. But sturgeon are all around me. A gathering of this many fish would seem to indicate spawning, but so far there's no sign of it. A glance between the rocks definitely shows evidence of spawning. Sturgeon eggs. This is why they're sticky, to cling between the rocks in the current. I can hear a strange sound. It sounds like a clunking or a vibration. I suspect it's coming from the fish, but I can't see it. Are the fish fighting? I fight my way upstream, holding onto the rocks to pull myself against the current. Then, just ahead of me, it happens. The male vibrates his body against the female. Then he releases his sperm just as the female releases her eggs. The fish are spawning. And not only am I the first person to ever see these fish spawning on the artificial spawning beds, but I've managed to somehow film it in all this current. Sperm clouds the water, fertilizing the eggs, and the eggs sink to the bottom and stick. The sound comes from the male hitting the rocks on the bottom as his body shakes. So every time I hear that sound, I know that somewhere nearby a pair is spawning. And I hear it a lot. The spawning grounds definitely work. After a while, the current pushes cameraman Todd and I off the edge of the spawning bed, so we call it a dive and head to the surface. Jen surfaced just before us. She and David greet us with a victory dance. We can cover a lot of river just getting our gear off and climbing onto the boat.
Whew. That's just amazing. Hundreds and hundreds of sturgeon, all sort of getting together to spawn. And just as far as the eye can see in every direction, which actually is only about 20 feet, there's some sturgeon looking at you. Very cool.
So, at the end of a long day of battling the current to film a secret sturgeon spawning bed, we bring the boat ashore at our remote riverside camp to warm up and celebrate having proved that sturgeon are in fact spawning on these beds. Over their millions of years on Earth, sturgeon have encountered many obstacles to survival, but humans are the greatest obstacle. From overfishing to loss of spawning grounds, the sturgeon nearly didn't survive. But now, with efforts to propagate the species and rebuild their spawning grounds, sturgeons are making a fantastic comeback. It just goes to prove that when people put their minds to it, they can repair the damage they've done to nature. It just takes a little creative thinking and the determination to do what's right.
Don't go away. Jonathan is about to become a coral farmer.
Coral reefs are incredibly diverse marine habitats that are important to the health of tropical ocean ecosystems. Unfortunately, all over the world, coral reefs are being threatened. Coral is very sensitive to temperature and water quality. In some places, the reefs are not looking very good. In the Florida Keys, several species of corals, particularly staghorn coral, which grows in shallow water, have been hit hard by a combination of storms, disease, and predators. Ken Niedermeyer is doing something about it. Ken is the founder of the Coral Restoration Foundation in Key Largo, and he has figured out how to farm staghorn coral. Cameraman Tim and I grab a flight down to Key Largo to meet Ken and learn how his coral farm works. We meet up with Ken on a sunny spring morning for a day of checking up on his underwater crops. I give him a hand putting his boat in the water. Ken takes us less than a mile offshore to the secret location of his coral farm.
I thought it might be fun to pick up some corals, kind of show you what we do, you know, pull corals off the trees, tag them, and then bundle them, kind of the whole routine, and then we'll take them out and plant them on the reef. So you can.
I thought I was just going out to observe, but clearly Ken has plans to try to get some useful work out of me. In fact, he's always looking for volunteers to lend a hand. We arrive on site and Ken ties up to his mooring. Next, I get a briefing on what to expect underwater and what I'll be doing to help.
So we have 100 different genetic strains of staghorn coral here.
Ken's weight belt contains an unusual assortment of tools for a scuba diver.
Got these.
Chisel.
In case we see sharks.
Next, it's time to suit up and hit the water.
Okay, I think I'm ready.
The coral farm is only 25 feet deep, and it doesn't look like any coral reef I've ever seen. The coral is being grown on structures that Ken calls coral trees. These grunts are already treating the coral trees like reefs. Each coral tree has a bunch of small pieces of staghorn coral hanging off of it like Christmas tree ornaments. Over time, the corals get larger and larger until they start to crowd each other. What Ken and I are going to do is thin out the large pieces. Ken shows me the technique. Basically, he's snipping off pieces of coral with a pair of wire cutters. Next, it's my turn, and it doesn't feel right to be breaking coral. This goes against everything I've ever been taught. But Ken assured me that it's okay for the coral on the farm. And we aren't going to throw away these coral cuttings. Next, Ken and I are tying short sections of fishing line on all the pieces I cut off. Then we start hanging the cuttings on a tree. Over the next year, they will grow as large as the pieces they were cut from. A local trumpetfish comes in to inspect our work. And a resident grouper hides under one of Ken's experiments. Finally, we harvest a dozen or so large pieces of staghorn coral and head back to the boat.
That is a very impressive operation. There's a lot of coral growing down there, and it seems really happy to be growing on those little coral trees. Very neat.
Back on the boat, I fill a tub with water.
So this is the coral that we're going to transplant. So you let them grow out, then you cut them off and hang more up and let them grow out. And
Everything out there started with, all the coral would have fit in this bucket.
Really?
The whole thing.
Next, we move the boat a few hundred yards to a reef where we will transplant the coral we just harvested.
So this is a reef called Snapper Ledge, and there's a big ledge on it, and there's lots of fish usually.
But there's hardly any staghorn coral.
You know, a lot of people ask why we roll backwards off the boat. The answer is quite simple, because if you roll forwards, you're still in the boat. Coral ready for transplant. It's pretty amazing. I don't think many people get to do this. I'm going to be part of making a new reef.
Down on the bottom, Ken leads me to a barren section of reef that could definitely use some staghorn coral. He starts by scraping off algae and marine growth to clear a section for the newly transplanted coral. Next, he mixes up a putty-like glob of epoxy that can cure underwater. Then he presses the staghorn coral into the epoxy. In a few hours, it will be stuck permanently. Now it's my turn to try the same technique with the next piece. If I don't scrape all the way down to bare rock, then the epoxy won't stick and the coral will most likely die. Ken and I plant about a dozen pieces of staghorn together in an area about 4 feet across. It takes about half an hour for the two of us to plant all the coral we brought down. And when we're done, the fish are already moving into their new habitat. This is a piece of staghorn coral that Ken planted a year ago. It has already grown over the epoxy and onto the reef. It's doing well and growing quickly. With our mission complete, we head back to the boat. Thanks to the work of Ken Niedermeyer, we now know that at least some species of coral can be farmed and used to replant damaged reefs. While this technique doesn't address the threats to coral, it does provide a new method for restoring damaged reefs.